Hello, everyone. Good morning, good day, or good evening to you, depending on where you're joining us from, and thank you for joining. My name is Katie. I'm part of the marketing team here at BloomReach, and I'll be your host for today's webinar, Transforming the End-to-End Digital Customer Journey in Banking and Insurance. So just before we start, a quick overview of what to expect on today's webinar. So today's webinar will be about 45 minutes, but that's including a 15-minute Q&A session, and the recording of the webinar will be made available to you afterwards. So feel free to share it with others or put it in a blog post, post to social media, and we very much hope that you do. So now for a very quick introduction to BloomReach. So BloomReach brings businesses the first open and intelligent digital experience platform, which is also known as a DXP. BloomReach drives customer experience to accelerate the path to conversion, increase revenue, and build customer loyalty. We're headquartered in Mountain View, California, with offices worldwide, broadcasting today from Amsterdam. And our portfolio of customers includes Capital One, ING, United 4, Unive, Provincial, and others. So let's dive right in. So I'm proud to welcome today our speaker, Olivia Burdock. So good afternoon to you, Olivia.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Katie. Thank you to the BloomReach team.
Yeah, thanks. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us in our community. So today, Olivia is going to address the top 3 end-to-end customer journey challenges that prevent financial services from delivering superior customer experiences. But before she dives into that, I'd like to give you a quick background on Olivia. So Olivia is a principal analyst serving digital business strategy professionals. She leads Forrester's coverage of digital disruption and digital innovation in financial services. Her research explores changing customer expectations and behaviors of financial organizations that are seeking to capitalize on these opportunities. So without any further ado, I'd love to hand it over to you, Olivia.
Thank you very much, Katie, for the kind introduction. As Katie said, I will be discussing today the top 3 challenges that a lot of banks and insurance companies come to me with when they're trying to change their customer experience and entirely transform the digital customer journey that their customers really are experiencing. So before we sort of start on these top 3 challenges and solutions, first, it makes sense to address why you need to change, because I find that a lot of our clients still struggle with building the internal business case for change. So to give you a vision of what's happened in the last 50 years or so and why insurance companies and banks need to change. In the 1960s, we had the so-called age of distribution, and a lot of banks and insurance companies that are still successful today really emerged then because they could benefit from their large branch networks or agent networks, and they, of course, spent huge advertising dollars, pounds, in order to attract customers. And for a newcomer, it was quite difficult to compete because any new company would have to basically build up that infrastructure from scratch. So that really insulated banks and insurance companies from much competition. By the 1990s, we started competing on basically IT infrastructure. So companies were building these amazing IT infrastructures, which were very expensive to assemble, but gave companies a tremendous source of competitive advantage because they could do everything either online or by, of course, processing some of the data in the back end. And of course, these systems, which were only built in the 1990s, are now quite antiquated. And what we are moving towards now is the age of the customer, where basically the cost of technology has fallen so drastically that those IT infrastructures serve more like a straitjacket to a lot of incumbents as opposed to a source of competitive advantage. So it's all about the intimate knowledge of your customers and how you serve them that really differentiates companies today. And only those companies that basically build the processes and the systems that serve customers, we believe will basically survive this age of the customer. To give you an example of what is happening in terms of digital disruption, we get a lot of questions from banks and insurance companies asking us, when will Google become a bank? Why is Amazon launching checking or current accounts? And of course, the big tech is very much a threat, but not always in the way that incumbent firms think. So I wrote a piece a few years ago called "Google Will Not Become a Bank," and recently we also commented on Amazon's entry into current and checking accounts. For us, there are two ways in which these players are potentially dangerous. One of them is they are all amassing, particularly Amazon, but also Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, the bad companies in China. They are amassing customer ecosystems which are made up of complementary products and services that basically try to make the experience for customers so compelling and so sticky that it's very, very difficult to get out. So unfortunately, financial services, which are your bread and butter, might end up becoming basically a feature of Amazon's product. So that's the one way in which GAFA might disrupt you. There is another one as well. These kinds of companies build bridges between a number of disruptors, software-driven startups, fintech and insurtech, and your consumers. So what happens is that basically through their distribution power and through some of their tools like Amazon Web Services, fintech and insurtech is more able to get to the end consumer. And that means that we have had a proliferation of software-driven startups attacking banking, insurance, and wealth management. And some of these companies are really reaching great scale. So we always tend to think about them as small software-driven startups, but a lot of them are now hundreds of people and have, of course, attracted hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. And it takes only one of them to succeed and really disrupt the market. And of course, there is also the traditional competitors. So your competitors who are insurers and banks who are all undergoing digital transformation to make themselves faster, more agile, and more customer-centric. So these companies are still very much need to be on your watch list because they are really undergoing a transformation which makes them more able to compete by lowering their operating costs and improving their digital customer experience. So definitely three groups of disruptors to watch. And I think a lot of insurance companies and banks know that they need to address customer experience. So when we look at our survey of business and technology leaders globally, we see that 71% of financial firms and insurers see improving customer experience as a high or critical priority. And of course, you could do a lot in this space, but very frequently, these kinds of executives don't really know where to start. Which of course brings me to the topic of the webinar today, the top 3 different challenges that insurers and banks are experiencing and how to fix them. So today I will discuss the unsuitable products and services that still linger in banking and insurance, back office complexity that prevents change and slows down change and makes it much more costly, and also the narrow view of the marketing funnel that focuses a lot on the sale and not so much on the experience after the customer purchases a product. So let's go with the challenge number 1, unsuitable products and services. A lot of products in financial services have been designed at the time, which I talked about earlier, in the age of distribution or information, where really you needed the agent or a relationship manager to explain these complex products to customers. So these products were not designed for someone browsing on the website and then deciding to purchase it himself or herself. Names like standard variable rates, breakdown covers, package current accounts, they don't really mean a lot to customers. So how do you address this? In order to sell products online, you really need a quite a different set of products and services, ones that are suited to the digital age. So when we think about how you need to redesign your products and services, we think of 4 different principles. We want the products to be simple, to be able to be explained without a very, very lengthy PDF file. Of course, there are some regulatory requirements that you need to meet, but For the browsing and the research experience, you really need simplicity. You want products that are engaging. So these are really sort of digital services that a lot of banks and insurance companies are developing, and I will share with you a couple of different examples. It's about really engaging customer in what they're trying to do, focusing on their needs as opposed to just the product. You want products that are flexible, that can be changed easily and that can basically respond to customers' changing needs. And you want something that is tailored, that is specific to that customer and personalized without being extremely complex. So these 4 principles should really guide you in how you design the product. And of course, it's not just about redesigning your product. It's also about how you make those products easily findable on your website through web search, through personalized recommendations that surface the right products to the right customers. So let's look at a couple of examples of companies that have gone through that process. I think ING DiBa in Germany is a great example. ING Direct, initially ING globally, is a very good example of designing a set of products that are very much focused on the customer. So ING DiBa went through the process of simplifying its product range from 20 products to just 10. And guess what? They actually saw the number of customers increase. I once had a chat with one of our clients who said that a typical response of a banker to any kind of customer segment problem is to design another product. Of course, that's very difficult because every product has with its own specifications, with its own content, and doing all of this for your web experience is quite difficult. So you have to be quite disciplined in how you think about products. Another example comes from an insurance company. Ageas developed basically a new brand called Back Me Up, which offers flexible insurance with no annual contract. So this is quite revolutionary. Typically, insurance basically is an immutable annual contract where it's quite difficult to change things. And Back Me Up is very, very flexible. It allows a customer to basically pay a monthly subscription-like fee and allows customers to build their bundle of products that they want to insure. So you can, for example, pick 3 different gadgets and you just take a photo of each one of them, let's say your bike, and then that adds it to your coverage, which really simplifies the experience of buying and choosing insurance products that are right for you. So those are 2 examples of how companies are addressing both the simplification of products, the change of products, but also designing with the digital experience in mind. That brings me to challenge number 2, which is back office complexity. So I think a lot of banks and insurers would like to change their products, but often find that they can't. And that's because they are struggling with legacy systems, be that core banking systems or policy administration systems, which don't really have very powerful product configurators and that don't allow them to make changes frequently or at low cost. I had once a client remarking that it took 6 months just to change a price on a given product, not even change the entire setup of the product, just the price, interest rate on a product. So really this limits sometimes what you can do. But those legacy systems are often written in old programming languages. They are very much hard-coded. The business rules that come with them are hard-coded. So it's very difficult to change anything at all. And you might be struggling with that internally and you don't know where to start. So to give you a quick solution to what you can do, I think there is no easy answer here. It's about embracing end-to-end transformation. And when I mean end-to-end transformation, that often means starting with the customer, thinking about the types of customer journeys that you might want to change, as well as what that means in terms of the digital products that you want to build, and then all the difficult part, which is thinking through how this affects your capabilities, how it affects the technology that I just mentioned, so some of your back-end legacy systems, but also some of your maybe newer technology stacks, something to do with obviously digital experience platform or content management system, or perhaps your marketing automation tools. There are a number of technologies that a redesign of the customer's digital experience is likely to impact. There is a data infrastructure to think about how or what systems you're going to use to get at the data buried in legacy systems. And of course, also the processes and the people that use those systems and participate in the creation of customer experience. So all of this needs to be taken into consideration and thought about in terms of integration points and how you will measure the success of each customer journey improvement. So again, I will give you now a couple of examples of companies that have gone through this rather difficult process. So the first example is Lloyds Banking Group in the UK. So Lloyds Banking Group is one of the largest banking groups here in the UK. It covers a range of products from insurance to retail banking, commercial banking, foreign currency, so really quite a complex group. And what they have done is they've basically been going through a digital transformation program, which is now in its third phase. And as part of the phase 2, which was completed recently, they really focused on end-to-end service design. And what I mean by that is that it's very easy to frequently just attack the top of that pyramid, and that's the user experience, just thinking about changes like font and maybe the layout on your website. What is more difficult are the two further layers that actually determine the quality of that user experience, and that's customer experience and also the underlying organizations and operations. So in order to make actual sort of change at the front stage, you really have to think about different channels, for example, branch, contact center, fulfillment, marketing, but also the back end that we just discussed. So this is your technology, how you surface data, how you develop and price products. And that bit is really, really the difficult bit. So the Lloyds Banking Group has been undergoing that change quite successfully. Another example, this time from France, is Macif. So Macif is an insurance firm, and they basically implemented a new design and delivery process as part of their web design project. So what they started with was, again, that customer focus that I talked about, the focus on customer journeys. They organized a number of customer journey mapping workshops to which they invited a number of colleagues from different functions, and these functions normally are quite difficult to work with because every single bank and insurance company out there was designed in a very kind of siloed way, where product teams were separate from maybe operations, separate from maybe underwriting, and separate from customer service. So by organizing such a workshop, Macif actually made sure that all the different stakeholders who impacted a given journey, let's say the purchase of an insurance product, were actually there together at the table thinking about how to improve that customer journey. And then they did sort of two things. One was focusing on the pain points, so drawing the current customer journey, and then using that to reimagine the journey, to think about what it would take to make this the ideal journey for the customer. That's when they also embraced experience design, thinking, okay, now we know what customers want, how can we translate that into specific design? And how can we then think about the different touch points, digital touch points that we need to change? And what do we need to change in there? What sort of systems and processes do we need to impact in order to change that customer journey? Do we need a new content management system? Do we need a digital experience platform? And what will it take to change this? And then, of course, there's a whole new process to do this. In their case, they embraced Lean Startup methodology to make sure that they embraced iterative development and this focus on customer and making sure that basically you reduce risk to everything that you do. So that's the process of basically tackling some of the back office and the back end systems. There is another problem which is more to do with the culture and the attitude that is prevalent in financial services, and that's the narrow view of their marketing funnel. So a lot of marketeers typically work with this. This is the traditional marketing funnel, which went from sort of awareness, consideration, research, and then purchase, and then loyalty. And you can see that most people focus on the sort of top end of that funnel. How do I drive more traffic? How do I basically make sure that customers buy my products? We have slowly moved towards a slightly better vision of and reflection of customer reality, which is the fact that most customers actually go through 6 different stages. They discover products or their needs, they explore these, they buy, but then they of course use and get in touch with you if they have questions, and re-engage when they're thinking about whether they should stay with you or renew, or maybe around sort of loyalty programs. And most marketeers think of these as all very equal, or actually maybe prioritize the first 3 stages: discover, explore, and buy. But customers' reality is that they spend very little time on the buy stage or explore, and then quite a long time on the use, ask, and engage. And this is what matters to them, because if, let's say, you have a claim, then this is a very, very big moment for you, a moment which we would call a moment of truth. And if you fail at that moment, then that customer is going to leave you. So if you are going to channel basically marketing resources into acquiring customers, and then the customer is going to leave you within 6 months, then you're wasting your money. So you need to think about how to design digital touch points and the entire experience, basically focus on the entire customer life cycle, from that discover, explore, buy, use, ask, and engage phases. So you need to break it down into smaller steps. And again, to give you a couple of examples of how others have done it. One example is from Nationwide Mutual Insurance in the US. Nationwide Mutual Insurance is a great company and has really improved the Forrester's Customer Experience Index, and they've been doing a lot of work on how to improve their customers' experience. So this piece of work was part of that effort. So Nationwide Mutual started mapping its claims journey. And what they found is that in the company, and that's a problem that we encounter very frequently, no one really often has a view of the entire process that a customer goes through. And the reason for that is that these companies are very divided, and you might be doing just your small piece. Let's say you are a person who is responsible for taking the first notice of loss, or you might be the adjuster who goes and inspects the damage, or you might be a contact center staff who responds to a customer problem or questions about where their claims process is at. And it's very difficult to understand what is a problem for customers throughout this journey. And I think most companies usually presume and guess that customers might have 3 issues across that entire journey. Well, Nationwide actually mapped its entire claims journey and found that there were a number of pain points that no one had considered, that there were actually 10 different pain points for the customer. So that process really helped them realize what is the problem, and then, of course, the next stage, which I've mentioned, moving to designing the solution to address this, whether that's a new claims app or a new claims experience on your website. It's about translating that knowledge around customer pain points into the digital design and delivery so that you don't hit the delivery gap. Moving on to an example from banking, I think there is a huge opportunity for banks to engage customers after basically the sale process is finished. That's because banks have a lot of customer data, and that data yields itself to a whole new digital services that companies like BBVA are now embracing. So BBVA has basically taken the data that it has in its systems, things like monthly income, monthly expenses, household expenses, and the customer's debt, and use the data to build a financial health score for its customers. And what that does is that it changes really the conversation from just one focused on products do you need a loan, do you need a savings account, and so on, and changes it into BBVA becoming a partner, helping their customers improve their financial health. So by showing a customer that financial health score, BBVA can then say, okay, you are obviously missing an emergency fund, let's start to build that up, perhaps in the envelope of a savings product, or you're missing a pensions plan, let's have a conversation around this. So it creates a much richer conversation, not centered on the product, but on the customer situation and how they need to address that. So I think both insurance companies and also obviously banks have the opportunity to use the data that they have to engage customers in a much more, in a much richer and sort of context aware way, where it's about helping customers reach their goals as opposed to just thinking, how do I actually sell more products? So I think that's a cultural change, but also obviously one that will require changes to your processes and to your systems, because you will need to surface data that you have about customers probably across different systems. So I think these are the top 3 challenges that I've now addressed, and I'm sure many of you have probably experienced them in your own work. So I'd love to now hear from you about whether you're addressing these, or maybe whether you have any questions related to this and how to really get started. So let's move on to the Q&A section of this webinar.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And yeah, I will lead us into the Q&A. And thanks for that great insights and also all the real-life examples. It's always very nice. So I'd like now to open the Q&A session, and a big thank you to those of you who already sent in questions during our webinar. If you have any additional questions, please use the Q&A box that you see, or feel free to tweet at us at BloomReach Inc. So we're going to jump right in with a question that came when you were discussing the back-end complexity of systems. And the question is, why do so many FinServ companies have siloed technology environments, and how can they solve it?
And that's a great question, and one that I often hear from banks and insurance companies. So obviously there are a number of issues here. One is the pure basically age of some of these companies. So banks were very much leading and cutting edge technology adopters back in the 70s and 80s, and at the start of this age of information that I described. So they were very much leading then, but what ended up happening is that they basically got stuck with old core banking systems. Many of them, as I mentioned, with hardwired business logic and data stores without easy way to access the data. So simply by having that old technology and by patching and building on top of that for the following 3 or 4 decades, this created a bit of a sort of spaghetti code and spaghetti mess, if you'd like, in their back end. So it's very tricky to address this. That's compounded with how a lot of banks, and particularly insurance companies, have grown. So many of them might have basically acquired other companies in different markets, and every single acquisition brought with it a new policy admin system. Or the fact that if they acquired a new line of business, they might have had one policy admin system for general insurance, but a completely different one for life insurance. So in their systems, a customer is essentially a policy number, and there is no single place where a customer is linked to all these different policy numbers. So we basically have a logic that was built around these systems as opposed to the customer, and that's very difficult to address.
Yeah, great. And kind of moving on, another question I think kind of leads on top of that one. In that complexity, especially as you're talking those older systems, the legacy systems, especially when they're still critical for business and you need them, how are you seeing companies deal with these and work around those silo technologies? There are 3 approaches, so I'll discuss them quickly in turn. One is to rip and replace, a very costly, very risky strategy, because effectively I think a lot of people would say that you're doing a heart surgery on a living patient. And unlike surgery where you can put that patient in under anesthesia, you can't do that with your customers, because they are all using the products and systems on a daily basis to pay or make transactions or check their balances. So very tricky to do.
Number two is basically throw in the towel and say, this is not something that I can change at all, let's start afresh. And we're seeing quite a number of companies basically set up these new digital subsidiaries or digital ventures on the side, where they basically start with a clean slate and say, okay, let's now build a beautiful modern architecture with the newest systems and not even try to tackle the previous challenges, and let's just basically start afresh. So that's great, and it helps you basically with new customers, maybe millennials or whichever customer segment you're targeting, but of course doesn't tackle the maybe millions of customers that you have sitting in the old brand and the old systems, unless you migrate them very slowly, but that will take years. So there is a third option, and that is to kind of think about maybe like a middleware layer or a data layer, or maybe like a digital experience platform that is capable of pulling content from multiple sources and allows you basically to abstract some of that logic and basically build on that. So those are the three options that you basically have.
Great, thank you so much. So next question coming in. And that one is, how are you seeing the more traditional companies compete with the newer niche startups?
I think they try to compete on basically like three levels. So one of them I mentioned is launching basically competitive offerings. So if you think about someone like Banco Bradesco in Brazil with their new digital bank Next, or in Europe, we've got the example of Caixa Bank in Spain with Imagine Bank. In the US, we've got MassMutual with Haven Life, or Shelter Insurance with Say Insurance. So that is definitely one option, trying to basically be as quick and as nimble as these startups, but also creating a new company that has effectively a much low operating cost, thanks to a digital business model where you're relying on digital sales and service for customers, and also, as I mentioned, you're using new cloud-based technology, which is effectively cheaper. So that's one of your options. Another one is, as I mentioned, going through the painful digital transformation process, where really you make customer centricity the heart of what you do, and you change your funding model and how you organize to reflect this. So you actually put your money where your mouth is, and change how your organization is. So we at Forrester have this customer obsessed operating model that we discuss, which is basically how you can make your company fast, customer-led, insights-driven, and very much connected. So by doing all of these things over a number of years, you really stand a chance to compete with some of the newcomers.
Great, thank you. Yeah, great explanation. We have one last question for you, unless somebody throws one in, a last-minute one, in the Q&A box. But that question is, do you have any recommendations for early steps to take now that make the most impact down the road?
I think it depends a little bit on your company's culture and the level of support that you might have from your senior executives. If you are in and I know that a lot of insurance companies and banking executives will have that issue. If you're really struggling to make the case internally that things need to change, I would really start small. So I mentioned Nationwide, obviously, and I mentioned Lloyd's and also Macif. And I think one thing that these companies have in common is they basically started slow. They picked one customer journey and thought, okay, how can we change that customer journey? What is required? But importantly, it wasn't just about the what, how that customer journey needs to change or what new products and services you need to develop, but also about the how. So using the process of redesigning and reimagining that customer journey as a testing bed to test a new operating model. So do you need to organize differently? Do you need to change your IT engineering practices? Do you need to change some of the architecture? What will it take to make basically this customer journey work that you've just done on one customer journey? What will it take to make that a scalable process across your entire organization? So I think tackling one customer journey like this should hopefully provide you with enough insight about the process and your operating model, but also gives you some ammunition, making sure that you collect data as you go on what you did, what worked, what didn't, the business impact of that change. So you have to be very, very disciplined about this. Did you acquire more customers? Did you acquire better customers? Did you improve your customer experience scores or customer satisfaction? Did you cross-sell more? You have to really think about the metrics that you're going to be using to build your later business case for a larger transformation. So I think start small and try to scale it from there is the best answer.
Yeah, great answer. And we actually have one more that came in while you're talking, so we'll jump onto that one. And that is, how can companies keep both known and unknown visitors engaged, especially serving them what's relevant?
So I think this is effectively a question around personalization. So you're trying to basically think about your customers as specific people. So you might start building personas of them, and then you try to design, as I mentioned, some of these customer journeys around those personas. But of course, that's just the beginning. And then what you need is what we effectively call the personalization engine. So you need the right content that you can basically surface to different customers, and you need the right technology to enable you to do this. So keeping customers, particularly unknown, engaged is about that. It's about understanding how they navigate the website, for example, what they're trying to accomplish, basically designing the process with that in mind, and continuously optimizing the experience using things like A/B testing to make sure that you get it right. For known customers, it's a bit easier because, as I mentioned, with BBVA, and also there are other insurance companies out there that do that well, like Aviva, you can build content specifically for them that will help them in a way that is engaging. For example, helping them improve their financial health score, like BBVA has done, or in the case of insurance, using what we call borrowed relevance. So changing conversation from the product, let's say home insurance, to the asset and the thing that matters to that person that they're trying to protect. So their home, building content around how do I take care of my home, how do I look after my home or my family or my health. So we're seeing a movement away from a business model which is effectively focused on compensation and therefore often has no touch points to customers, because unless you make a claim, you're unlikely to speak with your insurer at all until it basically comes to renewal, to a more frequent engagement around what matters to you as a customer.
Great, thank you so much for that. Yeah, the customer focus, definitely where we see it. So thank you so much, Olivia. We're going to close the Q&A for now, just to be mindful of everyone's time. And yeah, thank you again for your insights and expertise that you shared with us. Everyone, feel free to reach out to Olivia on Twitter if you have questions or comments that you would like to talk to her about. And to our audience, we thank you guys for your time and participation with us today. And any remaining questions, whether you're watching live or on demand, reach out to us on Twitter at BloomReaching, or they reach out to Olivia on @OliviaBurdock. So additionally, we would like to very quickly have a little shout out and let you know about our upcoming conferences this year in San Francisco and Amsterdam. So we're gathering digital professionals for an industry event on digital experience with inspiring speeches, hands-on workshops, and a showcase of amazing initiatives in the digital experience space. Please do check out the links in the description of this webinar to see if it is right for you, and we very much hope to see you there. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on the BloomReach website. And with that, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us today, and a very big thank you again to our presenter, Olivia, for sharing her expertise with us.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie, and the BloomReach team for having me.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much. It was such a pleasure. So I wish you all a very great remaining day, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much.